Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased that you are with us today, and thank you for logging into this Zoom event. I am Judge Averill Rothrock. On behalf of the Courts and Community Committee of the King County Superior Court, I welcome you to our event in celebration of Native American History Month. Our program is titled Representation of Native Americans in Law and Justice. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement by Alicia Luke. Alicia is a project program manager with the Department of Judicial Administration, a department that works very closely with the King County Superior Court. Ms. Luke's family is affiliated with the Alaskan Tsimshian tribe. Please give your attention to Ms. Luke.
Thank you, Judge. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the homeland of Chief Seattle's Duwamish tribe, the first people of Seattle who have stewarded this land for generations and continue to live here. Acknowledging native land shows recognition of and respect for the indigenous people and ways of life and begins to shine a light on history's untold. So together, let us honor the Duwamish past and present and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. I ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Luke. I'm just trying to pull up, anyway, starting, there we go. All right. Our court formed the Courts and Community Committee to promote public understanding of the justice system through interaction with the public, through presentations, teaching, and community events. And I want you to know that our committee includes both judicial officers and court staff who collaborate together to foster a spirit of inclusivity at the court. And the events provide an opportunity for an exchange where the court can both help educate others about the justice system and listen and learn from its community. So speaking of listening and learning, we have 4 accomplished and amazing speakers today who agreed to be with us to participate in this celebration. I'm so pleased to say that our guests are all Native Americans who are making very important contributions to the law and justice. They're all Washingtonians. I made a special point of asking them to mention where they can ways in which our court and legal community can help increase representation of Native Americans and be more inclusive. I'm going to now give an overview introduction of all 4 guests, and then we can enjoy their presentation. And we plan to have some Q&A at the end of their presentations, and at that time we will invite you to enter any questions that you may have in the chat. Our first speaker will be Justice Raquel Montoya-Lewis, who has just been elected to the Washington Supreme Court following her appointment in December of 2019 by Governor Inslee. And I think if everyone were not muted, we would be hearing a large cheer from our crowd of over 150 registered guests today. Justice Montoya-Lewis served 5 years as a Superior Court judge in Whatcom County. She has served as both trial and appellate judge for tribes in the Pacific Northwest for over 15 years, and as an associate professor at Western Washington University's Fairhaven College. Justice Montoya-Lewis has been recognized locally and nationally for her work on juvenile justice reform. She has a BA from the University of New Mexico, a Master of Social Work from the University of Washington, and a JD from the University of Washington School of Law. She's an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Isleta tribe and a descendant of the Pueblo of Laguna tribe, 2 federally recognized tribes in New Mexico. Currently, it might be accurate to say that she lives mostly on I-5, going back and forth between Olympia and Bellingham, and we are so pleased she is with us. Next, we will hear from attorney Sarah Roubidoux Lawson, who is of counsel at Schwabe Williamson and Wyatt in Seattle. As a lawyer, she was named in 2017 to the Washington Rising Stars list for Native American law. Like Justice Montoya-Lewis, she has multiple degrees. She has a BA from the University of Michigan, a JD from University of Wisconsin School of Law, and a Master's of Laws in Taxation from the University of Washington School of Law. Before joining Schwabe, Ms. Lawson spent over 10 years working in tribal government, advising tribal councils and tribal departments on legal matters, including as general counsel for the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. Ms. Lawson is well-versed on issues involving Indian trust land. She is an enrolled member of the federally recognized Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. Ms. Lawson is president of the Northwest Indian Bar Association, and she will tell us about that association very shortly. We will then hear from Professor Gregory Silverman, who is faculty director at the Center for Indian Law and Policy at Seattle University School of Law. For the past 20 years, Professor Silverman also has been an active tribal judge, sitting as an appellate justice on tribal courts throughout the Pacific Northwest. Prior to joining the law faculty, Professor Silverman practiced law in Massachusetts with a focus on land use. Professor Silverman holds a BA from Vassar College, a Master of Arts and a Master of Philosophy from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Columbia University, and his JD is from Columbia Law School. Professor Silverman spent 2 years as a visiting scholar in Germany. Professor Silverman is an enrolled member of the Mohegan Tribe of Indians of Connecticut, federally recognized sovereign Indian nation of the Mohegan people. Attorney Rion Ramirez is the CEO of Port Madison Enterprises, which is an agency of the Suquamish tribe on the Kitsap Peninsula. He also served previously as their general counsel and as general counsel for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, one of the largest employers in the state of Connecticut. Ms. Ramirez currently serves as the chair of the Democratic National Committee's Native American Caucus and serves on additional DNC committees. Mr. Ramirez practiced civil law in the Seattle law community, most recently with Dorsey and Whitney, before going in-house. He received his BA and his JD from the University of Washington and is a true Husky fan. He is an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa Band of Indians in North Dakota. And friends, these are just some highlights of the accomplishments of our speakers. They obviously have multiple experiences from which to draw, and I thank them again for agreeing to share themselves and their perspectives with us. And at this point, I am pleased to turn it over to Justice Montoya-Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be a part of this panel and get a chance to share a little bit with you during this important month where we get an opportunity to really focus on Native American heritage, history, and the ways in which Native people continue to contribute to our society and in all kinds of ways, not just in terms of the law, but in terms of every aspect of American life. I tend to talk at these kinds of events in November by focusing on some of my own family history. And part of the reason I do that, there's really two reasons. One of the reasons that I do that is because it is traditional in my tribe and for many tribes to introduce yourself by talking about who your family is. In informal ways, that often looks like meeting, for me, I meet a new person, a new Native person, and the first half hour of the conversation is, or sometimes it's 5 minutes, is figuring out the way in which we are related, the people we know in common, and that's a way in which we figure out the ways we are family, even if we are from different tribes and aren't blood related. We definitely, as Native people, view each other as part of one big community, and very typically we can find connections to each other within minutes. Most meetings that I attend when I was working in Native communities, which is the vast majority of what I did in my career, the first part of any meeting involved the sharing of food and meeting each other, catching up on each other's lives, and if we didn't know each other, figuring out the ways in which we knew each other and knew people in common, or were in fact related to one another. And I came away from those meetings and still come away from those meetings often saying, oh, I met someone who is my cousin. And so part of why I talk at many events, but particularly events during Native American Heritage Month about my family is it is a way in which I do informally what I would do formally if I were formally introducing myself to new people in the way in which I was raised to do it, which was to begin as far back as it was possible for me to go and begin to talk about the people who came before me and give tremendous amount of detail about who they were, what clans they belonged to, who their relatives were, and eventually, if you go back, through my family history, you'd arrive at me, and I would be the person that then I would get to the point of saying my name, both my English name and my tribal name, my own clan, and that would be the standard kind of introduction. And those introductions often take a long time. I have sort of formalized that process in public speaking events because it gives, I think, the people who hear that a sense of the feeling that many Native people have, and I include myself in this feeling, that we have been here for millennia and that we will continue to be here for millennia. And that was something that my father really drummed into me over the course of my life. He had a patience that was unlike the patience that I've really ever seen. He had a view of history that went back hundreds of years and looked toward hundreds of years into the future. And so when there were things that were crises for me personally, his response to that was often, it will come around. That was very frustrating to a 14-year-old who was having a 14-year-old crisis, but it was always his response, this will pass. And his sense of that, I think, came in large part from our traditional belief that and in fact, that we come from this long line of people who suffered greatly for us to be here. And there will be people that are a long line of people that come from us as we move forward through history. The screen that you see behind me is a photograph of the church at the Pueblo of Isleta. I'll try to move out of the way a little bit so you can see it. It is an adobe building with white stucco on the outside of it. It's maintained very meticulously throughout the year to maintain that bright white look. And again, you can see it, of course, against the blue New Mexico sky, which unlike here is almost every day of the year that color. And it is a Catholic church, as you may be able to see by the cross on the top of the church. In the interior of the church is painted with many Catholic stories and symbols that a Catholic person would recognize, but it's combined with many parts of the Isleta tribal story as well. It's a very unique building. I have a photograph of it in my office, in my chambers at the Supreme Court, because for me, that is a picture that shows kind of the melding of the cultures that has been required in order for us to survive and in order for me to be here. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a second to get this going. And I have given this talk, entitled it Descendant Daughter, for the reasons that I just described. I am sort of celebrated right now as the first Native American on the Washington State Supreme Court, and one of only 2 or 3 Native people on any state Supreme Court in the country. There's one Native person on the federal bench. She serves in the federal district court, excuse me, in Arizona. She's a Hopi tribal member. There's never been a Native person on any federal appellate bench, including the Supreme Court of the United States. So the position that I hold is one that I take with great seriousness, and I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility to do the work that I'm doing with integrity, and to do it by bringing all of who I am with me. And this title of this presentation is the way I think about who I am in this role. I am proud of the work that I personally have done in order to arrive at this position and to have been able to run for and win an election. But I'm here because I am a descendant, because I am from people who fought hard for the people who came after them to have a future. Obviously, they didn't necessarily imagine this future, but they imagined a future. And this is a future I could not have achieved without the support of people who I've never met, who existed 150 years ago. And it couldn't have happened without the support of the Native community in the state of Washington now. So all of those things kind of underline or undergird this presentation today. I'm not going to talk at any length about this slide, but I do just want to note that the federal government has viewed dealing with Native people over the course of the United States history as a problem. And you can go back as recently as a few years ago and as far back as the beginning of this country and find policy documents, official documents of the US government referring to the Indian problem. The list you see on this slide is a list of a variety of ways in which the federal government has attempted to deal with the reality that this country was founded in a land where people already inhabited, that people had functioning governments in and functioning societies, and cultures that were alive and well. And as the federal government pushed many of our communities further and further west, there had to be new and different ways of dealing with the Indian problem. And as I talk about my own family, I can see the effects of each of these eras of dealing with Native people and the federal government's decisions about how to do so impacting my own family. So I talk about this in the context of my family, not to talk about it as an anecdotal story that allows you to know more about who I am, but rather as an example that is more than an anecdote, that is an example of how it is that the Native people you might see in your courtrooms, whether they are judges, and I absolutely hope that there will be more Native judges that follow me, whether you see them as jurors or whether you see them as defendants or parties in other cases, that we all have histories that are analogous to the history that I'm going to share with you today. I'll just note here that the Allotment Act, which was one of the earlier ways in which the federal government attempted to make Native people more reflect the white people's view of how people should be in the world, put a ban on tribal dancing and a ban on tribes sharing what they had. They're in the law itself, they prohibited what they called giveaways, or the reckless giving away of property. A very common way in which Native people survived was through sharing. That was also for many tribes a cultural value. That was something that was banned in the Allotment Act, and I share that particular detail so that you can understand that these various approaches to tribes and our existence really went down into the most what I would call sacred details of who we are and were as a people. This photograph is a photograph of my great-great-grandmother, Sachima. Sachima is, this photograph was a photograph of a series, one of a series of photographs that was taken of her. She was living in the 1800s through the early 1900s and was, as an adult, the wife of the Pueblo of Laguna. There's some indication she spoke some English, but her primary language was the Carasan language, which was the language spoken in Laguna, which is a community tribe that still exists and is about 25 miles west of Albuquerque, and is the tribe that Representative Deborah Haaland is from. And for those of you who aren't aware, she is someone that President-elect Biden is considering appointing to the Department of the Interior. So Sachima lived at Laguna her whole life. She spoke the Carasan language her entire life. She participated in the tribal traditions, the tribal religion. She was married to Jose Paisano, who was my great-great-grandfather, and he was the governor, which in this state we often call governors chairpersons or chairman or chairwoman. In New Mexico, in the Pueblos, we mostly refer to the leaders of the communities as governors. So Jose and Sachima had several children, and those children, many of them were sent to Carlisle boarding school. This is part of the boarding school history. It's another part of an attempt by the federal government to deal with the Indian problem, and to do so by killing the Indian and saving the man, which was the motto of this school. The school is located in Pennsylvania. It was founded by Colonel Richard Pratt, who formulated this school on a military school. These buildings still exist, and it is now the U.S. Army War College. He established multiple other schools with this model, but there were far more than 26 of them. By the time this era of educating Native children began to fade, there were many kinds of these schools, and many of them were run by Presbyterian or Catholic churches. This is a photograph of the student body at Carlisle boarding school in around the 1880s. These kids were taken from tribes all over the country and placed on trains and without their parents' permission, and sent to these boarding schools with the stated intent of making them like white people. Their hair was cut. They were beaten for speaking their tribal language. They mostly didn't know where they were going. If they arrived in their own clothes, those clothes were taken from them, and they were put in the Carlisle uniforms, and they were housed in dorms. This is a photograph of Pueblo children arriving at Carlisle boarding school. And this photograph contains within it a photograph of one of the children of Sachima and Jose. That person's name was Coyote, and her English name was Mary Perry. Eventually she became Mary Perry Paisano. And that is my great-grandmother. And that, in this picture, we believe it's her. So I'm trying to hold my cursor over it. Oh wait, here we go. So this person. And so she arrived around 1880. She seems to have been at Carlisle for about 6 years. The records are a little bit unclear with respect to that. But she went there for what would effectively be called high school. This is a photograph of the before picture that was taken. Carlisle was very good at documenting everything about their students. They documented when they arrived, what they looked like when they arrived. There's often health reports that you can see where you can see that the initial health exams that these children were given were often very invasive. So this is, and they took before and after pictures. So this is a before picture with Mary Perry in it. And then two boys who are also from Laguna. One is named John Thomas, and the other one, for some reason, I'm blanking on the last, oh, Benjamin Thomas. So Benjamin Thomas, John Chavez, and Quixote or Mary Perry. And this is their before picture. Colonel Pratt made a lot of public comments about the method he was using at Carlisle boarding school and that he was promoting across the country. And in fact, what you see in these quotes from a speech he gave, the speech itself was a fundraiser. He's very successful as a fundraiser to raise funds to continue these schools. And you can obviously read what's on the screen, but you know, his view of this was that if we remove these children from their homes, from their cultures, from the land that they know, from the land that their ancestors know, then they are more likely to become what he called civilized. And in becoming civilized or assimilated, then the Native people themselves will solve the problem of what to do with the Indian problem, because they'll lose their language. They'll lose what he called their superstition, what I would call their tradition and culture, and their savagery, which, by the way, is a term that appears to refer to Native people in not just in federal government documents, but in case law, including case law in the state of Washington, really up until the 1950s. So Mary Perry graduated in we're not, as I said, sure, in around 1884. And she was one of the lucky children in that she was able to return to Laguna and that she survived. She survived her experience in boarding school. Many hundreds of children did not survive. There are many graves at Carlisle, which people often go and visit. And in fact, after I gave a speech similar to this one using a different picture, but talking about the fact that my great-grandmother survived and many others did not, I received a letter or an email the next day from a family member of someone whose relative died at Carlisle, asking me for help about how to find his grave and his body. They knew he died at Carlisle. They have attempted through research and communication with the archivists there to locate his body. He's not on any list, and they were effectively told that he is probably in an unmarked grave with many other bodies, and the ability to tell who was probably next to impossible in the absence of there being DNA. So the family's attempt to bring their child home was thwarted, and this woman had reached out to me for help and guidance about whether it was possible to bring him home if I knew of any other way. It's a heartbreaking story, and I want to tell you that it's an uncommon one, but it is not. And I count myself very lucky that my family survived this experience. And Mary Perry's experience was one that I guess I can't say it's rare that she survived, but I think that it was the luck of the draw that she survived. This is her husband, William Paisano. There are many pictures of him that we have. This photograph is one that we have had blown up and has been on the wall of our house. This photograph represents very much to me who my great-grandfather was and who my family is. You will note that he is wearing the flag. He was a very proud American, just as my father was, and served in the military as part of a long line of people who had served in my community in various parts of the United States military. He was someone that was a strong leader in the Laguna community. And when I am feeling sorry for myself for whatever reason, I look at this picture and it's clear to me just from the set of his eyes that his patience for my self-pity is minimal, and it allows me to move forward. This is a photograph of the day of my grandparents' wedding, and so this is the same person, William Paisano. This is Mary Perry Paisano. This is Petra Jojola here, and Juan Antonio Montoya. So that's where the Montoya comes from. These two people, I'm not quite sure if you're seeing an inverted picture here, but these two individuals, Petra and Juan Antonio, are from the Pueblo of Isleta, which is where I am enrolled, and they are the parents of my father, and William and Mary are the parents of my grandmother, May Paisano. I just want to check the time here. This is my grandfather. He also went to a boarding school, Haskell Indian School, which if you Google now, you will see is a tribally owned college and university. And it's a remarkable place now, but came from a very dark and sad history. And there are many people living today who tell horrifying stories of their experience having been in and survived the school when it was a compulsory boarding school for Native children. And it has now been bought and taken over by Native people to turn it into, to change that legacy into a place of educating Native people. This is my grandmother. She is the daughter of Mary Perry and William Paisano, May Paisano. She married my grandfather and moved from Laguna to Isleta and became formally recognized as a member of the Pueblo of Isleta through a traditional process. She also went to Haskell, which is where she met my grandfather. I love the picture here of her on the top and the picture of my grandfather, because they both really show the process of assimilation, and their choice of images for their yearbooks were to be as sort of mainstream looking as it was possible to be. Short haircuts, this sort of curled or permed hair, which I couldn't get my hair to do. I can't imagine how she did it. Must take hours. And below is this picture of her on a horse, which is how I remember my grandmother. She had many horses. She rode around their land and the reservation. That was her sort of preferred mode of travel. She drove, but she preferred to get on horse if she could get there on horse if she could. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the Pueblo right to vote here, but this photograph in the bottom is a picture of Miguel Trujillo, who is one of my uncles, who is from the Pueblo of Isleta, returned from World War II and went to register to vote and was denied the right to vote because he was an Indian. And they cited to the Constitution, which while there was a federal act in 1924 that appeared to grant citizenship and the right to vote to all Native people in New Mexico and Arizona, they believed that that did not apply to the Native people of those states because there were constitutional prohibitions on allowing Native people to vote. He sued and won the right for Native men to vote. And as we celebrate the 100th year of the right of women to vote, there are communities where Native women weren't allowed to vote until the 1960s. The photograph he is in here shows him with his daughter, that is Josephine Wakanda, who grew up to become the Surgeon General for the Indian Health Service. I'm almost at the end of my time here, so I'm just going to skip a little bit ahead. This is the Albuquerque Indian School where my father went for a part of his schooling, and this is my father, and I use this picture again with great intention to show his pride in his service to the United States. He was a U.S. Air Force officer for 20 years. Following his retirement from active duty, he worked as a civilian for many years and was involved in intelligence work through much of his career. I don't know much about what he did because it's probably unclassified now, but was classified for many years. And so that sort of long-term service and support to the country was something that I was really raised with, that I should be someone who gives back to our country in some form. I think he would have loved it if I were willing to have been in the Air Force, but I took my role in serving this country in a different direction. Just going to skip to this. That sort of brings me up to this question about what it means to belong in this country. And I think that this month of Native American Heritage Month, particularly as it relates to an election that has just occurred, or perhaps by some measure is still occurring, really matters. The Native vote in Arizona is as a result of Native people, many of whom in the Navajo or Dene reservation got on horses and rode the entire day to reach their polling stations to vote. They voted in huge numbers, and by some measures, their votes resulted in the win in Arizona for President-elect Biden. But they have not really been discussed in much detail in the news with respect to the importance of their particular vote. This little graphic gives you an example of how rarely we are considered as Native people. This is a question that was done right around the time the Washington football team was deciding whether or not to change its name. There was a survey done about whether or not they ought to. And if you look on the side about who they asked, they broke it down by generation, they broke it down by race, but it appears they didn't break it down by asking Native people. Perhaps in other adults, they did consider Native people, but you wouldn't be able to tell that. That is something from earlier this year. This photograph is recent. This came as part of an exit poll discussion on CNN on election night, might have been the day after election, where they did exit polls looking at who voted for whom. And you can see that white, Latino, Black, Asians were talked about. And then there was something else. This has become somewhat of a meme in Native communities. In fact, I've seen a couple of people already with t-shirts that just say something else on them, which is a very typical sort of way for us to be funny about these kinds of things. But I have yet to see a poll or any reference up until maybe yesterday or the day before, when there was an article in the New York Times about the importance of the Native vote. So this last two pictures, and I know I'm out of time, are just photographs of the day I was sworn in, and the importance it was for me to ensure that Native people were invited to that swearing in and a part of that swearing in. Certainly I was the one who was taking the oath, but it was about much more than that. It was about the fact that those people that I've shown you today survived, and that every one of the people who were there, this woman who gave me a feather, who was part of the Gamble Slalom singers who's participated in that day, about their survival, as well as the survival of all of these women who currently work on issues in Eastern Washington on missing and murdered Indigenous women issues, environmental issues, and others. And this photograph here of this young woman, this young girl, she is someone I look to. She is just someone I met in Spokane earlier this year, who I look to carry on these legacies. And one of the reasons I do these speeches during Native American Heritage Month is because I want to remind her and others in her age that she has a proud history to take some strength from, to make her own dreams come true. Thank you. And I will stop my screen share.
Thank you so much, Justice Montoya-Lewis. The pictures are so riveting, along with the story and the way that you tell it. Thank you so much. And this time, I will invite Ms. Sarah Lawson to address our crowd.
Thank you, Judge Rothrock, and thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. I love hearing you speak, and I love when you give your family history, because it tracks so almost identically with my own family history of my great-great-grandfather went to Carlisle, my great-grandfather went to Haskell, and the joke, although it's not really a joke that I tell, is that, you know, my family is the shining example of the federal assimilationist policy towards Indians in the late 1800s. So my name is Sarah Roubidoux Lawson. Roubidoux is my family name for the Iowa tribe of Kansas and Nebraska. As Justice Montoya-Lewis said, we are all related, and so very frequently when I go out speaking in Indian country or to conferences, people will see Roubidoux and say, oh, my grandma was a Roubidoux. And the game is, okay, well, who was your Roubidoux? Because usually if they're Native, I can track it back to one of four brothers. And if they're not Native, then, well, we have to go a lot further back. But usually in Indian country, we can track it back to one of these four brothers that were in the area in the 1700s, 1800s. I'm currently the president of the Northwest Indian Bar Association. Northwest Indian Bar Association is a minority bar association that was founded about 25 years ago to support Native attorneys, judges, and law students in the Pacific Northwest. And that includes Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. NIBA annually holds an annual dinner as a fundraising dinner for our programs. Our programs include sponsoring a Indian legal clinic at the Chief Seattle Club and in Tacoma, as well as student programs. And really a lot of our focus in the last 5 years or so has been on our student programs because we saw such a great need to support our students. The number of Native lawyers in the United States, so there's 1.2 million attorneys in the United States, and there's only 2,460 Native attorneys. So we are 0.2% of the attorneys that are out there. One of the biggest problems that we have is the pipeline to law school. So getting our Native students interested in law school, number one, and then getting them through the LSAT process and the admissions process and on enrolling into law school, and then of course supporting them while they're in law school. One thing that they found with attorneys, Native attorneys, when they graduate, 20%, so the overwhelming majority of those Native lawyers go back and work for tribal governments. And then of course the smallest number go into law firms, which actually tells us that we have trouble getting our Native students really integrated into the legal community writ large. So our biggest issues that we're focusing on are of course the pipeline to law school, so getting our students interested and admitted to law school, then networking those students in the community, supporting them in practice once they graduate from law school, and then also taking a look at the judiciary and making sure that we are getting more Native lawyers on the bench. With the pipeline, there's been a program that was founded by ASU, so Arizona State University College of Law, and Michigan State College of Law, that speaks to undergraduate students and provides them support in the LSAT process and increasing the number of Native students that are going to law school. We've actually had a lot of success with that, and I can say that at University of Idaho College of Law, just as an example, 3 years ago they had 2 Native students in their entering class, and this year they have 8 Native students in their entering class. So over the course of 3 years, they've basically doubled their numbers. And this year, fall of 2020, we're actually seeing increased number of Native students enrolling in law school across the board. NEBA really seeks to support those students, first by providing them scholarships. So we provide a scholarship for anyone who is enrolled in a tribe that is a Northwest tribe and they're in law school anywhere in the United States, or for the Native students that are enrolled in other tribes, but that are enrolled in a law school within our service area, which is Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. We give out annually about 8 to 12 scholarships to those Native students, and they're about $1,000 each. And they are given out during the shoulder season in law school. So in December, when their student loan funds have run out and they haven't received their new disbursement, this really helps carry them through the holidays and allows them to get home and see their family, or to be able to pay their rent in January. The other way we support our students is when they graduate, we offer bar stipends to our students so that they, to Native students, so that so they don't have less to worry about while they're studying for the bar exam. I know myself, the first time I took the bar, I was actually working and also trying to study for the bar exam, and that's not easy. So whatever we can do to support those students and give them more time to study is definitely worthwhile. We've also expanded our programs in the last couple of years to include stipends for Native law students who are going to moot court competitions. So every year there's a National Native American Law Students Association moot court. And we really want to support our students going to those moot court competitions, not only to get the experience of doing moot court, but to also network with the other Native law students who are enrolled in other schools across the country, because that really helps form their network that they'll rely on when they're in practice. The same thing goes for stipends that allow students to attend the annual Federal Bar Association Indian Law Conference, which is a huge conference of almost every Native attorney or Indian law practitioner in the United States. And again, a networking opportunity for our students to really get to know other people who are working in Indian law or who are Native attorneys, and to start building their network. Our programs are funded entirely by either charitable donations that we receive from tribes or from the money that we raise at our annual dinner. We were not able to hold our annual dinner this year because of the COVID-19 crisis. But if you're interested, we are still accepting donations on our website, and that's www.nwiba.org. And as I mentioned before, we have an increased number of Native students that we will be serving over the course of the next 4 years. So we're really going to be relying heavily on donations to help serve those students. The other way that the legal community can give a hand to Native students is in mentoring. So because we are such a small legal community, it's hard for us, and we get stretched really thin trying to both help our students and support our careers and support our families, and then also deal with general issues that are faced by Native communities. So we really do have a need for more people in the legal community to help mentor students, especially in areas that are not Indian law. So 63% of Native attorneys out there are practicing Indian law, but we still want to encourage our students who are in law school now that they don't necessarily have to go into Indian law. If they're really interested in intellectual property, they can do that. If they're really interested in corporate law, they can do that. Really, the rising tide lifts all ships. But with so many of our attorneys only practicing Indian law, we really need to rely on the outside community, the non-Indian legal community, to provide mentoring opportunities for those students who want to be in-house counsel at Microsoft one day, or who want to be in IP, in intellectual property. And that would be great if we could get those opportunities for our students. All right, that's it. I've run through all of my notes. I will hand it back to Judge Rothrock.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lawson. All right, and now I welcome Professor Gregory Silverman.
Okay, thank you, Judge Rothrock, for inviting me to participate in the King County Superior Court's celebration of Native American Heritage Month and the election of Justice Montoya-Lewis as the first Native justice to the Washington Supreme Court. As some of you, as Judge Rothrock mentioned, I'm faculty director of the Center for Indian Law and Policy. And as some of you may not be familiar with the center, let me begin by saying just a few words about it. The Center for Indian Law and Policy makes Indian law a focal point among the array of educational opportunities available to our students. The center is dedicated to educating the next generation of Indian law attorneys to be powerful advocates for justice in Indian country, protecting and expanding tribal sovereignty, supporting the development and operation of tribal justice systems, and assisting tribes and their members address the myriad legal challenges that accompany greater political autonomy and economic development. The center houses the Institute for Indian Estate Planning and Probate and the American Indian Law Journal, one of only 2 law reviews in the United States dedicated to federal Indian and tribal law and policy. The center oversees the most extensive Indian and tribal law curriculum in the Pacific Northwest, places law students in judicial externships in tribal courts, assists tribes and attorneys in drafting and in revising tribal codes and constitutions, provides continuing legal education to bench and bar on Indian law topics, hosts public forums and events highlighting existing and emerging issues and problems in Indian country, and works with Indian people, tribal leaders, and attorneys to provide them with the information, training, and support they need to be successful in improving the quality of life throughout Indian country. The center's most recent initiative revolves around the Indian Child Welfare Act. The center is currently in the process of developing the organization and infrastructure to support the work of tribal ICWA attorneys in the state of Washington and throughout the Pacific Northwest. The center is very proud to have been the counsel of amici curiae on a brief in the recent ICWA case, Washington Department of Children, Youth, and Families v. Greer, the very important opinion authored by Justice Montoya-Lewis. Thank you, Justice Montoya-Lewis. It is an honor to participate on this panel with you this afternoon. When Judge Rothrock asked me to join this afternoon's panel, she requested that I say a bit about the representation of Native students in American law schools. Of course, the obvious first question one might have on this topic is simply how many Native law students are there attending American law schools? It turns out, however, this question is rather difficult to answer. To explain why, consider a study that was done about 10 years ago, in which researchers investigated the increase in Native attorneys entering the legal profession in the last decade of the 20th century. That study found that between 1990 and 2000, the number of Native American lawyers in the United States increased from 1,502 to 1,730, an increase of just 228 Native lawyers, a category that includes Alaska Native lawyers as well as American Indian lawyers. During that same period, more than 2,600 law students who self-identified as Native Americans graduated from law school. If these numbers are to be believed, less than 9% of Native students who graduated ABA-accredited law schools entered the legal profession. Clearly, something is very wrong with the way in which we are tracking the number of Native students attending law school. In fact, the likely explanation of this discrepancy is some combination of the following 2 factors. First, that many of the students who self-identified as Native Americans were simply box checking. Box checking occurs when an applicant to a school indicates on the application form that they are a member of an underrepresented minority, when in fact they are not. Their motive in checking the box is usually to gain some advantage in the admissions process and in the award of financial aid. A second likely factor is that some applicants may have been genuinely unaware that one is not a Native American simply because one has an Indian ancestor, no matter how remote. That as a general matter, to be an American Indian under the law, one must be a member, that is to say, a citizen of a federally recognized tribe. Call me cynical, but I suspect the greater weight should be given to the phenomenon of box checking. Indeed, to address this problem with overcounting Native students at ABA accredited law schools, in 2011, the ABA House of Delegates approved a non-binding resolution that law school applicants who self-identify as Native American provide additional information regarding their tribal citizenship, or if they are not members of a federally recognized tribe, a heritage statement explaining why they identify as a Native American. With that caveat, then, I can report that the ABA estimated in 2010, the most recent year for which we have statistics from the ABA, before 2010, and that was a year before adopting the previously mentioned resolution, that Native students composed only 0.82% of law students attending ABA accredited law schools. While the count of Native Americans law schools skews higher than it may actually be, it is nonetheless clear simply from the number of Native attorneys in the legal profession that Native students are among the most, if not the most, underrepresented group at American law schools. According to the US Census Office, Native Americans, a category, as I mentioned before, comprising both American Indians and Alaskan Natives, form approximately 1.6% of the United States population, 1.6%. For those of you who might be curious regarding the official number, the Native American population in the United States is approximately 5,220,580. According to the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, as Sarah pointed out in her remarks, out of approximately 1.2 million attorneys in the United States, only 2,640 attorneys are Native American. In percentages, that means only 0.2% of attorneys are Native. That is 0.2%. The ABA estimates the percentage of Native attorneys to be a little higher at 0.3%. To put these numbers in context, consider that approximately 4% of attorneys in the United States are African American, about 3.3% are Hispanic Americans, and 4% are Asian Americans. That Native Americans form only 0.2 or 0.3% of American attorneys at law is why it is probably correct to say that we are the most underrepresented minority group in the legal profession. Obviously, the extreme underrepresentation of Native attorneys in the legal profession is directly related to the underrepresentation of Native law students at ABA accredited law schools. Why is this the case? Why aren't more Native students applying to and attending American law schools? One statistic suggests that Native students simply do not feel welcomed in the law. It is estimated by the United States Census Office that 65,356 Native Americans who are 25 or older have graduate and professional degrees, 65,356. Recall that it was estimated that there were only 2,640 Native attorneys in the United States. So of all the Native students receiving graduate and professional degrees, only 4% pursued law degrees. This is very disturbing. Of the most successful young Native Americans who not only graduate college, but successfully complete a graduate or professional degree, only 4% choose to become lawyers. This number suggests that in addition to encouraging more Native students to pursue a college education, it is incumbent upon us to inspire young Native children and students to join the greatest profession in our country, to feel included and welcomed in the legal profession. The Center for Indian Law and Policy, like the Northwest Indian Bar Association, is very active in recruitment and retention of Native law students. Working with other parts of Seattle University, we are working to further develop the so-called pipeline in Indian country, from grade school to high school to college and law school. In 10 minutes, I can only try to highlight and describe to you the severity and depth of this problem. The possible solution of this problem, the programs and initiatives to ensure that Native Americans are fully represented in our law schools and in a diverse and inclusive legal profession, must form part of a longer conversation. But as busy as I know so many of you are, I would ask if it is all possible for you to join that conversation. Among the most successful and highly regarded members of the legal profession in the state of Washington, your presence on the reservations of our state, speaking and engaging with our Native youth, would send a strong message of inclusion from our legal community, as would your engagement with our Native law students at the law schools of our state. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you this afternoon, and please contact me if you would like to become more involved in making the Washington legal community the most Native-friendly legal community in the country. Thank you.
Professor Silverman, thank you so much, and thank you for your invitation to everyone who's already in this space to think about how we can seriously take action to help. I appreciate that so much.
Thank you very much.
And now our last speaker will be Rion Ramirez, and we'll hear from Mr. Ramirez, and then if you've been speaking and you haven't kept up with some of the comments in the chat, I do want to let you know that there are some great and interesting comments, and I'll try and tabulate some of the questions, and we'll try to ask some questions of our panelists at the end. Mr. Ramirez.
Hello. Bonjour, Niji. Hello, my friends. My name is Rion Ramirez, and I am the DNC's Native American Caucus Chair, as well as Judge Rothrock had said, the CEO for Port Madison Enterprises, which is the economic development arm of the Suquamish tribe. And watching and listening here today, you know, I'm just really excited to join everybody and kind of we'll lead off by talking about who I am. I'm an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians in Belcourt, North Dakota. My mother's family's from Belcourt. My father was an enrolled member of the Pasco Yaqui tribe in southern Arizona. My wife is an enrolled member of the Quinault Indian Nation in Tohola, Washington. Her and my 3 children are all enrolled down there. She's actually absentee Shawnee Creek and Quinault. She's a direct descendant of Tecumseh. I like to say she's got cool lineage where I come from a long line of poor, pitiful Indian folks, or not pitiful, but poor, poor Indian folks in that regard. I'm going to kind of talk about myself a little bit and my own personal history in that regard. You know, I've been incredibly blessed throughout this time in my life in terms of, I've done things like staff President Obama. I had a presidential appointment under President Obama in terms of on the Commission for White House Fellows, where I was very fortunate enough to help select people like Representative Sharice Davids, who was in one of our White House Fellows classes that I got to know real well, and her and Deb Haaland were one of 2 first ever Native American women elected to Congress. This last election cycle led, tribal leader roundtables with Vice President-elect Harris, with Elizabeth Warren, Mayor Pete, with Bernie Sanders, in terms of doing a lot of different kinds of engagement in terms of making sure that Indian voices were heard in regards to the election process, in terms of making sure that people understood the issues that mattered most to us. But for me, the thing that I would like to remind everybody on the call is that it all starts with really kind of small incremental opportunities, in terms of, I would not have gotten those opportunities or ability to do different things without being in a position of people, engaging in terms of non-Indian folks as well as Indian folks, engaging with me and providing me opportunities. When I went to undergraduate school, I quickly there had a child, was in a position that I had no money, no nothing, was incredibly poor. We were on food stamps, general assistance in terms of welfare. We had nothing but I had this 1968 Cadillac sedan DeVille that I really loved and continue to miss to this day. Had a bungee cord that held down the back of the trunk, go over a bump, it would go thud, 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 thud. But my wife and I were able to work really hard, get through undergraduate. She graduated with a master's in education. I graduated with a JD from the UW. But in terms of going to school at the University of Washington, I was way in a position of not, I would just say, for use of the term ignorant, lack of knowledge. I just was really ignorant on the whole process of things. One of the things I look back on that really had a profound learning consequence for me was when I went to law school. They had these minority clerkship programs. I applied for it. I have a great story in terms of, supporting a family, not having anything, literally living in family housing at the University of Washington, sleeping on a mattress, nothing else. Of course, we did have a TV. Being Indian, I wasn't going to get by without having a TV. So we were able to figure out how to make that happen. But we literally just had a mattress on the floor that we slept on, a mattress on the floor for my young son, and had nothing. Had a great story to tell. And oddly enough, Justice Stevens Gonzalez, as well as another person, were the people that interviewed me for it. And I bombed horribly in terms of being in a position of being able to explain and articulate, my life story. For example, when they asked, who's somebody you admire and why? I remember this vividly because I sat there and gave a horrible answer about Carl Lewis because he was fast. I was a college athlete too, and I always dreamed of being fast, and used that by way of some profoundly bad answer. I had to go back to my family, explain to them at how poorly I had performed. I ended up not getting that, had to work as an extern that summer. But that was one of the most humbling experiences for me because I had an incredible story, did fairly well in school, but did not get an opportunity to work at a law firm because of my mistakes, my inability to articulate and be prepared in that regard. So that really humbled me, had me, crying at home. I'm not afraid to admit that. And it's something that was really, really humbling, but I really learned from in that regard. And then, my second year in law school, was able to ultimately apply for and get a job and worked at a law firm. I worked at Schwabe Williamson and Hyatt, where I met Judge Rothrock in that regard, and her, as well as another person, Vince Lombardi, were some very, very influential folks who gave me the opportunity to work there during the summer, got a job afterwards working there, parlayed that into going to work at Dorsey and Whitney. Subsequent to that, got to do a lot of different things. But what I would like to remind folks is that all of us in terms of Indian country, or many of us in Indian country, have a long story that doesn't include a lot of the opportunities that other people have. And the fact that we don't have people in our families or necessarily even in our communities that are going on to law school, going on and doing these things, oftentimes it is just the small little engagement from somebody helping them in terms of learning to do interviews, helping them in terms of learning to do things a little bit better, that provides them the opportunity to go on. I mean, we, in terms of Indian folks, need to be prepared and be willing to meet that challenge. But I think a lot of you on this Zoom meeting today can individually take the time to help in terms of engaging with, whether that's, Native students that are in law school, help them, provide them an opportunity in order to rise up and take advantage of the opportunities that are there. It's those little, small, incremental opportunities that allow folks like myself, like Justice Montoya-Lewis, and everybody else on this panel, the opportunity to get in the door and really move forward in a way we wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity to do. I've been very blessed in terms of being the chair of the Native American Caucus, doing a lot of political work. I get an opportunity to talk to and meet with and have good relationships with everybody from, like I said before, President Obama to my good friend Deb Haaland to my good friend Sharice Davids. But for me, I would not have been able to move forward without, people helping me along the way. And so what I would like to do is just remind all of you that you can have a profound positive impact in terms of us Native folks by being willing to engage and by being willing to help. So if you would take the time, get out there, and try to do work in Indian country in a way that allows for folks to get more educated in terms of tribal courts. If you're an attorney, try to engage and work in tribal courts, learn about our tribal governments, and learn about the work that we are doing in that regard. So for me, that's my little talk for you today, is just really, really to ask you all to get out and do more in our community and learn and provide, folks that otherwise wouldn't get the opportunity to move forward and do great things. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to all of our panelists. We really don't have any quick questions there. We did have one question about what Seattle University School of Law and the UW Law School are doing to attract students, especially Native American students. And I'll just say I'm a member of the King County Bar Foundation, and the bar provides diversity scholarships at both of the law schools, which are both tracking their numbers. Seattle U has been especially successful in having those numbers increasingly go up year to year. Did you want to add anything about that, Professor Silverman?
Sure. As with respect to Seattle University specifically, we travel extensively, especially throughout the Western United States, and attend different events to try to recruit Native students that are graduating college to the law school. We have the Doug Nash Scholarship, which gives one Native student per year a full ride guaranteed for the entire 3 years of law school. Since often that's a significant barrier for Native students coming to law school, the financial one, obviously. Another issue is retention in law school. And, that was mentioned by Sarah as well. And, there are sort of three features here that we all want to be sort of actively engaged with. There's the pipeline, which we talked a bit about earlier, and Sarah did as well. There's the recruitment, which is when the school just has to do the outreach and sort of be at different events to interest, Native students, to show them that they could have a career in the law. There's supporting the law students once they attend law school. And like I said, there's manifold ways in which we try to do that. But an important aspect of that, of course, is bringing successful Native attorneys and just attorneys who support and work in Indian country onto campus, to talk with our Native students, to give them the kind of opportunities. And of course, we're thankful to all the work the Northwest Indian Bar Association does in that regard as well. But I would say, financially, that's often the real challenge. And so the Doug Nash Scholarship is an important one. And of course, we have other scholarships that aren't full rides, but, significantly, attract Native students. We're well known for our academic resource, our ARC program, in which basically we have a non-traditional admissions program. So normally to get into law school, you have to have a certain minimum LSAT or a certain grade point average, right? But if you have a compelling life story, you don't have to be from Indian country for this. This is for any underrepresented minority in the legal profession, but it certainly includes Native students. You can have a chance to come and succeed at law school through our alternative admissions program. And that's also very important.
Professor Silverman, the final question from that same person was, how many Native American students are at the law school now?
So right now, even with all the efforts we make, we have six law students, Native law students at the, at the law school. Now, our class currently is approximately 200, right? So that would be 600 students. So 6 students out of 600 students, we're looking at 1% of the population being Native students. Okay? Now, given that the overall population, right, is 1.6%, we're still not sort of doing as well as I would like, obviously, and I would like to see us overrepresented, frankly, right, to start to make up the difference. But unlike many law schools, we're a lot closer to that, just having, hitting the mark of as many law students as Native Americans are in the general population of the United States. So it's better than 0.2 and 0.3% in the profession as a whole. So.
I appreciate that. And I do want to honor another question and just go over our time a little bit. And there's kind of a long question, Justice Montoya-Lewis, I don't know if you saw it, regarding the Bolt decision. Bolt is the name of the district court judge that recognized fishing rights of tribes here in Washington. And kind of the question is what do you think, I guess? Could you give us some thoughts on the Bolt decision? If there's anything that you could weigh in about that. It's actually a very long question, so I don't know that I can articulate all of it, but do you have anything about that decision that you might want to share?
I did read the question, and to a certain extent, I think there's things I probably can't answer because potentially those are questions that can potentially come in front of the court. I think that there are many people, and I would say that these are not Native people, who view that decision as having sort of answered all of the questions that are really in that question, that have sort of settled those questions. And I think that that decision has sort of calmed the waters, so to speak, the height of the debate. But my experience, having worked for a number of tribes with fishing rights, is that they continue to be very live questions. And so, the sort of fundamental question that's in that question about whether that has sort of settled the questions around what treaty rights are, how they work, whether that applies to a number of other issues, I think are absolutely live questions, which is why I think it's probably not prudent for me to be more specific than that. And I think that's one of the complexities of working in this field, is that it is a very complicated set of questions that that don't have a whole lot of guidance to answer them. So one of the things I think that is a way to talk to students who might be considering law school is to sort of present the opportunity for those kinds of outstanding questions, and there are many of them beyond tree questions that really need the representation and the voice of Native people involved in the litigation and the answers to those questions, because it makes a huge difference, I think, if you have the engagement of people who have lived lives that reflect an experience in some of those kinds of questions. And I don't think that that's necessary in order to litigate those questions or answer those questions, but it does change the discussion. And I've had that experience multiple times in the year I've been on the court.
Thank you so much for that. I need to conclude the program, and I wanted to say a few things just in thinking about the history and the ideas that our guests have shared with us, and the responsibility that we all have as members of this community to try to overcome that and be inclusive in our court system. I think you've given us so much to think about. And I'm so grateful that you were all willing to come and share yourselves with us, in addition to your stories, which, as Justice Montoya-Lewis said, are not anecdotes, but are really emblematic of the Native American experience. And it is just a great honor to have had you share that with us. And I also want to thank everyone who attended. When we talk about community and creating community, we all need to show up. And so for those of you that have shown up today and participated, made comments in the chat and listened with your hearts, I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you, our audience, for being with us today. So with that, I hope you all have a great rest of the month of Native American Heritage. And we all have a lot to reflect on from this enriching experience that we shared today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.